there. If you've ever wondered why your gut issues seem to get worse when you think you're eating healthy or when you're eating healthier foods, I want you to tune in because I'm going to explain why. So the answer might actually be in the processing of your food and also how your body reacts to the food that you're eating. So I totally get it. I've worked with so many women who feel frustrated when they start eating healthier foods and they get more gut symptoms. So what's the deal? So they're doing their best, they try to make healthy choices, but you're still struggling with gas and bloating, diarrhea, constipation, and all of these other gut issues. And sometimes it feels like the healthier foods that you're eating, the more the symptoms come about. So why don't we just eat processed foods? Because the processed foods don't create the same symptoms. But let me explain how this all works because I think it's going to be really helpful for you. I've seen firsthand as a dietitian for the last 15 years working with women with gut issues, how making just a few simple changes, especially to the processing of the foods or minimally processing your foods, can make a really big difference for your gut health. So let's just dive right in. Today I want to introduce you to something called the NOVA classification system. This is a system that was developed in Brazil at a university that helps us understand what's actually going on with processing of foods and how the different levels of processing might be impacting gut health. So basically, the NOVA classification system is broken down into 4 different parts. The first part is unprocessed or minimally processed foods. Then we have processed culinary ingredients. The group 3 is processed foods. And the group 4 is ultra processed foods. So you may have seen in the news media and New York Times articles, there's a couple really great New York Times articles that came out recently on ultra processed foods and how bad they are for your health. And then there's also the counter. So many of us are eating large quantities of ultra-processed foods. What do we do about it? How do we reduce them in our diet? And if you're someone who struggles with gut issues, what's the deal? Because if the ultra-processed foods actually make you feel better in the short term, why would we eat whole foods? Right? Sometimes it could be a really confusing conversation. So let's kind of get into this NOVA classification system because I think it's going to help you understand what's going on with your gut. So basically, the processing of food impacts the gut. And we can start with group 1. Ultra-processed or minimally processed foods. So these are your gut's best friend, most of the time. Think of these foods that come straight from nature, like fresh vegetables, fruits, or unseasoned meats, right? They're just the food. An apple would be a good example of a unprocessed or minimally processed food. It's just an apple. You pick it off a tree, you buy it from the grocery store, you get it from the farmer's market, and it's there, right? So they're as close to nature as it gets. And that's what your gut loves. That's what your gut prefers. That's what your gut microbiome loves. So if you're having chicken breast with some roasted vegetables, that would be group 1. That's minimally processed or unprocessed. Let's go next to group 2, and this is the processed culinary ingredients. So what the heck am I talking about here? This group actually includes things like oil, butter, sugar, salt, right? These are the things that you add to foods. They're ingredients you use to cook with or bake with, and they're fine in moderation. But if you start adding too much, they can throw off your gut balance. So if you're using olive oil, for example, to roast your vegetables, that would be a group 2 example. If you're thinking about herbs or spices that are just plain herbs or spices that are fresh, let's say fresh parsley, that would be a group 1. If they're dried, that actually would be group 3, which brings us to group 3 or processed foods. So group 3 is where we start to see some changes. These are foods with added ingredients to make them last longer or taste better, but they're still pretty close to the original form, or they're a very slightly processed version of the original form. Like if you dry something out, that's actually considered a processed food. So if you take cinnamon, a cinnamon stick, and you grind it up and turn it into cinnamon powder, that's considered a processed food, but it falls in this group 3 category where it's very simple, okay? Or let's say that you were to bake a cake. And the cake includes group 1 ingredients. It includes some like whole grain flour. It includes maybe some group 2 ingredients like some sugar or some maple syrup or some palm sugar or whatever you want to use as a sweetener. It might include some fruit. It might include, right, it depends on what kind of cake we're baking here, but let's just say a simple, like a regular cake that you would bake with just regular flour, sugar, eggs, right? You're using single ingredients. Some of them are slightly processed, but you're mostly using single ingredients. So this cake, if you're baking it from scratch at home, it might include flour, butter, sugar, those kinds of things. Those are actually all processed ingredients, but you're still in control of what goes in it. It's homemade, so it's not ultra processed, but it's definitely not in group 1 anymore because you took those plain ingredients that came from real food or they were real food and you turned them into something that was processed. But is that bad? I don't think so. right? We can certainly have some of those foods in our diet. Let's say you take that apple and you turn it into applesauce. You cut it up, you cook it on the stove, you cook it down so it's delicious, and then you eat it, right? And it's applesauce. Is that a bad food? No, I don't think so, right? It's a processed food because you did something to it. But that's different than category number 3. Group 4 are ultra-processed foods. And this is where the problem lies. This is where processed foods have gotten a really bad rap. This is the majority of the food that you find inside the center section of the grocery store. And many of the foods actually on the outer perimeter these days as well. Think about a high sugared yogurt, for example. Started out as milk, got turned into yogurt with a whole bunch of sugar and flavors added. Now we're definitely between group 3 and group 4, processed to ultra processed. So ultra processed foods in group 4, this is where we get into trouble. So these foods are full of preservatives, chemicals, and ingredients that you can't even pronounce. So these are industrial ingredients, not necessarily ingredients you would have in your home kitchen. So you're not going to make an ultra-processed food in your home kitchen, most likely, not unless you're adding a bunch of junk to the food that you're already making. The ultra-processing comes in to preserve the shelf life. It allows you to keep the food on the shelf for a really long period of time and make it shelf stable. Right? Oftentimes it amps up the flavor, amps up the color, amps up the sweetness with artificial sweeteners or food colors or flavors. Think Gatorade, ultra-processed food. Think Jolly Ranchers. Apple Jolly Ranchers, we took our apple, that was a group 1 unprocessed food. Group 3 would be a processed food like an applesauce with no sugar added. If we add some sugar to it, now we're kind of combining group 2 and group 3 into a processed food. The applesauce I would consider a minimally processed food. And then Apple Jolly Ranchers. That would be an ultra-processed food. Doesn't actually resemble the original food at all, or maybe it does. It just has added flavors, colors, something that makes it shelf stable. It no longer resembles the food it started out as. That's what we're concerned about. That's ultra processing. And the challenge with ultra processed foods is they're highly addictive and they're really, really bad for your gut. And the reason they're bad for your gut is because they're high in sugar. Oftentimes very high in sugar, high in artificial flavors, colors that disrupt the gut microbiome. They're high in chemicals or preservatives that keep the shelf life long and are damaging to the gut microbiome, which impacts the function and the ability of your body to digest and to tolerate foods. We also have a lot of added fats and a lot of added sugars and a lot of added just chemicals that your body doesn't need. So the problem here with processed foods is ultra processing. It's not minimally processing or baking a cake in your kitchen. That's not the problem. The problem is that so many of us rely on ultra processed foods for the core components of our diet. So why does it matter? Why do we care about processing? It's because the stuff in group 4, these ultra processed foods, these can really make your gut issues worse. Whether it's bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea, they're low in fiber, they're packed with unhealthy fats and sugars, and they can really throw off the balance of your gut microbiome. So on the other hand, sticking with foods in group 1, minimally processed or processed foods can actually support a healthy gut microbiome and reduce inflammation. They're going to support gut health. But let's say a lot of clients will come to me and say, Erin, I can't eat salad, right? Salad will destroy my gut. I heard that recently from a client. So what do we do if salad will destroy your gut? Well, let's take the spinach and let's steam it, or let's saute it, or let's put it in an omelet. So cooking the spinach actually takes the spinach from a unprocessed group 1 food to a processed group 3 food. Yeah, I'm talking about just steaming spinach. We're processing it because we're doing something to it. But is steamed spinach a problem? Absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. If salad destroys your gut, cook your vegetables. That's a great way to make vegetables and whole foods more tolerable to your gut, especially if you have a really sensitive gut or you're reacting to certain foods in their raw form. Cooking, no problem. It's fine. Find some raw foods that you can tolerate. Maybe carrots or bananas or something like that might be more tolerable to you at this point. And we need to, of course, do the work to help you feel better. But there's a difference between minimally processed foods or unprocessed foods and whole foods and ultra processed foods. And that's really what I wanted to share with you today. There's a difference. And ideally we want to move away from the chips and the cookies and the cake mixes that have all of the added chemicals and move more towards scratch cooking in your kitchen with real whole food. And that's going to serve your body, your overall health, and your gut microbiome way better than leaning into the ultra processed refined foods. So that's just kind of a recap, and I just want to share a couple like kind of summary points or key tips here to remember. So try to focus most on group 1 foods and minimally processed foods. Things like fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, whole grains that are in their whole form. Like I did a cooking demo last night and we made quinoa. The quinoa was cooked with water, right? We took water and quinoa and we turned it into a processed food because we cooked it. But that's still a whole real food. Like that's a great supportive, nutrient dense, gluten-free, pseudo grain that's high in protein and high in vitamins and minerals, right? So lean into those whole foods wherever you can. These are the most gut-friendly foods for yourself and for your diet. You want to limit foods in group 4, so the ultra-processed foods. You want to move away from those and more towards their whole components. These are things like the prepackaged snacks and the sugary drinks. Your gut is going to thank you. And one last quick tip. So when you're at the grocery store and you're like, is this an ultra-processed food? Is this a refined food? Like, I don't know. I want to eat more minimally processed foods or more whole foods. How do you tell? So how you tell is you flip over that package, and I don't have anything in front of me to show you, but you flip over the package and you look at the ingredients facts panel, right? And you go down to the bottom of the nutrient facts panel and you look at the ingredients. Read the ingredients. I did a class yesterday and we were talking about orange juice, and somebody was asking a question about orange juice, and I showed the orange juice. And on the ingredients for the orange juice, it said organic orange juice. And that was it. There was nothing added. There was no preservatives, no colors, no flavors. It was just orange juice. So when you're in the grocery store and you're like, I don't know. Is this a processed food? It's in a package. I don't know. Is this an ultra processed food? Is it a minimally processed food? I just don't know. Flip it over. Go down to the bottom of the nutrition facts panel, look at the ingredients. How many ingredients are there? Can you pronounce them all? Another example that I came across recently would be like seaweed snacks. So they come in a package, they're definitely a packaged food, but when you flip it over and you look at the ingredients, it's nori, it's seaweed, and salt, or nori, seaweed, and sesame oil. Is that an ultra-processed food? No, I would actually consider that to be a minimally processed food because it's maybe not a minimally processed food, but it's certainly a processed food. It's going to fall in category 3, not category 4, because there's not a lot of added junk to it. So what you want to do is try to avoid the foods in category 4 wherever possible and look at the ingredients to figure out how can I take this bread, for example, that you're going to buy with all of these ingredients and all of these added emulsifiers and gums and thickeners and preservatives, and maybe you buy the bread that doesn't have any of that stuff, right? That could be a really simple change. So I hope you found this helpful. I know I found the NOVA classification system pretty helpful when I learned about it, just to enable us to think about the separation between, okay, what's a whole food? What's a minimally processed food? Kind of goes along with those whole foods. What are the added cooking ingredients that we use to make foods flavorful and delicious? That's category 2. Category 3 are the processed foods, which applesauce and seaweed snacks and many other foods that we enjoy and I consider to be healthy for you fall into. And then there's the ultra-processed foods. That's category 4, and that's the category we really want to move away from towards the others. So I hope you found that helpful. If you enjoyed this video or you learned something interesting, drop a comment or an emoji below, and we'll talk to you soon.